Hey guys, so today we're going to be discussing historical thinking skills. These are the basic necessary skills in order to build upon over the course of the semester and also to start thinking like a historian. So the very first thing that we have to talk about is what is history? History can be thought about in two different ways, chronological thinking or historical eras. Chronological thinking is the foundation of historical reasoning. This is the ability to examine relationships among historical events and explain the causes of historical events. This is the French Revolution, and so this is what happened after that, thinking in order of the events in which they occurred. Historical eras, though, are fluid, and historians don't always agree on the start and end dates of particular periods of eras in history. So, for example, the Renaissance period. Some people believe it started earlier, some people believe it started later. Historical eras are really up for interpretation based on evidence that the historian provides. Historians are just people who study history. Point blank. It can be a student, it can be teachers, professors, archaeologists, sociologists, museum curators, and everyday people. Some people are historians just by hobby, not necessarily because of trade. However, there's two main things that historians do. The first thing is that historians think forward from the beginning of an event, problem, or issue through its development, and then they also start to anticipate some sort of outcome, or they, instead of working forward, they work backwards. So they start at one issue or problem or event in order to understand its origins and development over time. The second thing historians do is interpret data that's presented in timelines and other sources that start to identify patterns of change and continuity. The whole point of history is really to help us understand how things changed over time and how the human race evolved, and also what kind of things have continued and how can we learn from it. So what does it mean to think like a historian? What basic skills do historians need to have? The first thing is sourcing. Good historians always are looking at the sources that they're getting their information from. To source something means to find things out from a particular source. There's two different types of sources, however. There's the primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources are first-hand accounts of a time period or event, meaning that they came from somebody from that exact time period or were printed during that time period, such as a journal or a diary. In order to comprehend a primary source, though, it has to be read in the idea that you're revealing the humanity of the individual. What I mean by that is that you're really reading for their motives, their ideas, their hopes, their fears, their strengths, their weaknesses, and really what that tells you about what it was like to live in that time period. A secondary source is an account that was created by someone who did not experience the event firsthand or participate in the time period. So, for example, this would be a news reporter who was creating an article about the 9/11, for example. The next thing that you look at with sourcing is always the reliability. Some sources can be trusted and some sources can't. Some sources are better than others and some sources aren't. Some sources are going to be better because they are primary sources. Some sources are going to be better because they're secondary sources. It just kind of depends. So when we're looking at reliability, there's three main factors that determine the reliability. So those factors are bias, background, and purpose. When you're looking at a source, you are always looking at those three things in order to determine whether or not that source can be trusted. So when you're looking for a bias, you're really looking at what kind of prejudice or inclinations for or against someone or something or an event that particular source might have. When you're looking at background, it's particularly going to apply to historians and historical novels and accounts, secondary sources, or also whether or not that person was actually an integral part of the event. You're really looking at their experience and how well they actually know the event. The last thing that you're looking at is purpose. This is why is the author even writing? So if something is persuasive, they're usually trying to persuade you to have a particular outlook on an event or time period. Informative articles are going to be more factual, and then technical articles are more like the how-tos. The other skill that you're going to need as a historian is contextualization. When you contextualize something, you're trying to understand an event in the context of when it happened. For example, when I'm looking at a fight in the cafeteria, I'm going to look at what happened before the fight, as far as what kind of drama was happening, what rumors were spread, what kind of beef they had between the two people, in order to understand really why it happened. So contextualization is really understanding it and looking at the past, the present, and the future. So one of the major questions we ask when we're looking at contextualization is, how did the social, political, cultural, or economic world of certain individuals and groups influence their motives? So we're really looking at all of the factors that went into play in that particular event. So the last skill that historians need is corroboration. And this is the most important one, because as a historian, you're going to be creating an argument. So when you corroborate your argument, you're providing evidence that supports your particular argument. And when you are corroborating, you're really doing something called historical analysis. So when you are corroborating, you're using a variety of historical documents and artifacts that present lots of different perspectives so that you can really show that you have a solid point or argument about whatever it is that you're making your argument about. Corroboration is really where history gets fun too, because the study of history is really subject to your interpretation. So when you're corroborating, you're creating your own argument based on your own evidence, and you can really specify it to exactly how you want it to be. Oftentimes there's like multiple different causes of past events. So when you're corroborating an argument with evidence, you're essentially going to be saying that one of these events was more important or influential than another one, and demonstrating the importance of that through the evidence that you provide. All historical interpretation, though, should be grounded in evidence. You can't just argue that the sky is green when it's actually blue. Interpretation is different than opinion. So when you're interpreting something, you're providing evidence, you're providing facts to support your particular interpretation of events. When you're making an argument that's based on opinion, though, it's based on this feeling. I feel like this was this way. And that's not really corroboration, and it's also not really an historical argument. Historians also, when they're looking for corroborating evidence, they need to close read. So when you close read, you're really making an intensive analysis of a document, trying to figure out how to come to terms with what that document says, how it says it, and what that means. So when you're close reading, you're really beginning this process of historical inquiry. You're looking at a particular document set or a particular historical event with a historical question in mind. Historical inquiry is a questioning process. You collect and analyze data related to that question, then you can start creating your argument and corroborating it. Close reading means that you're analyzing already existing historical interpretations. So you might look at what an historian said about the Protestant Reformation, and then you're starting to ask new questions and then investigating perspectives of those who did not appear in the document and starting to make conjectures based on the evidence that you have. There's two different types of evidence related to close reading. Quantitative analysis, which is looking at verifiable, measurable data. These are mostly related to numbers, so earnings, revenue, population. And then qualitative analysis, which is what a lot of historians do. This is the non-measurable data. This is reputation, looking at images, feelings, beliefs, and values that you're going to gain from that particular document. I hope you got a lot of information out of this slideshow about how to start thinking like a historian. I look forward to helping you build on these skills throughout the semester.